Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a frontier. Thank you kindly for stopping by. It's very sunny here in Nairobi, and it's our hot season now. And early in the morning I see all these photographs of snow from North America and all kinds of places. My macro thoughts remain as they were over the weekend. I called it the year of G2, as Europe is off balance. I'll come back to what I wrote then a little bit later. The Goldman Sachs chief economist, the Twitter handle tweeted, Jan Hatzius is saying the US growth is here to stay. I agree with that completely. And then Bloomberg has a headline, Forget Emerging Markets. Hot topic at Davos 2015 is the US. The World Economic Forum has long been something of a coming out party for emerging economies, with developing countries dispatching politicians and executives to the Swiss resort of Davos to drum up interest. This year, the big magnet for investment looks to be an older player on the global stage, the United States. While Brazil stagnates, Russia enters a recession, and India struggles to implement economic reforms, the US is booming as energy prices plummet and Silicon Valley dominates global tech. Though yesterday's retail sales report, which was very soft, dampened enthusiasm about the scale of the US rebound, the American economy grew at its fastest pace in over a decade in the third quarter of 2014, reaching an annualized rate of 5%. The pendulum has shifted, said Jakob Frenkel. The US is now regaining its position in the world economy. It is the place where the recovery took hold in the most robust way, and I called it over the weekend the comeback kid of 2015. And I said the big winners are US and China. Last year the US created the most jobs since 1999. Lower oil prices are a tailwind worth $1 trillion. I said the US economy is the comeback kid of 2015. And notwithstanding the weak retail sales report yesterday, which I think will turn out to be an anomaly or a blip, I think the Federal Reserve is just now stopped printing money. I think the Fed is just one headline economic print away from raising interest rates, and a rate hike even as small as 0.25%, like it was in '94, will be the catalyst for a renewed surge in the dollar. I think the dollar index is headed to 100, and therefore you should buy the dollar. My home thoughts go back to Jack Kerouac and On the Road. The only people for me are the mad ones, the ones who are mad to live, mad to talk, mad to be saved, desirous of everything at the same time, the ones who never yawn or say a commonplace thing, but burn, 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 like fabulous yellow Roman candles exploding like spiders across the stars. I'll put up a photograph that Robert Frank took of the road and called it On the Road in homage to the book by Kerouac, On the Road. And Frank asked Kerouac to write the introduction to The Americans, which was a compilation of his photography. And of this photograph, which I'm putting up, Kerouac wrote, long shot out of night road, arrowing forlorn into immensities and flat of impossible to believe America in New Mexico under the prisoner's moon. And as I was looking for the On the Road photograph, I came across this one by Robert Frank, Men at a Funeral, and it's pretty arresting. Wall Street Journal tweeted early in the morning, 2 climbers become the first in the world to free climb to the top of Yosemite's El Capitan. It's rather a good photograph. And I like this photograph from Old Pics Archive, the opening of the Golden Gate Bridge, May 27, 1937. And one last image that the Serpentine UK issued, Julio Leparc, works that mesmerize with projected moving and reflected light. Political reflections on Thursday, a Saudi blogger will receive his second flogging for insulting Islam. This is an article by Robert Fisk, well worth reading. Sir William Hunter was a senior British civil servant and in 1871 published a book which warned of fanatic swarms of Sunni Muslims who had murdered our subjects, financed by men of ample fortune, while a majority of Muslims were forced to decide once and for all whether they should play the part of a devoted follower of Islam or a peaceable subject. Amnesty Online tweeted this image: Saudi Arabia set to resume the flogging of Raif Badawi this Friday, and obviously I can't agree with that. It's appalling. Charlie Hebdo Survivors Edition apparently sold out in minutes. It's probably bid only on eBay. I wrote about this in the piece I wrote over the weekend. Events in Paris, I call them Charlie Hebdo officers, then the Bonnie and Clyde show in and around Paris, and finally the denouement in two separate locations captured the airwaves completely. We all understand the language of the media. As such, the Kouachi brothers, Ahmedi Koulibaly and his crossbow-toting partner Hayat Boumediene, now in Syria, were so proficient at taking over the world's attention that Boko Haram's single biggest massacre and a 10-year-old female suicide bomber did not even rate a mention. In fact, President Jonathan saw fit to send condolences to France, but failed to mention events at home entirely. Then I was talking about the asymmetric threat arriving on the streets of Paris being deeply unsettling. Mentioned the fact that as small boys, the Kouachi brothers were abandoned by their Algerian-born parents and brought up in a children's home in Brittany. I was saying I think the euro-dollar exchange rate is headed to parity and even lower as early as this year. I think the economic blowback from the frozen conflict in Ukraine with Russia has exacted a price. And in fact, just before Charlie Hebdo, interestingly, and the conspiracy theorists are latching on to this, is Hollande was making some very conciliatory comments about Russia. Economics and geopolitics are more intertwined than ever before. And I was saying, if European bond yields are a signal and they're at record lows, then Europe is in danger of a death spiral. According to the latest reports, but now being denied, Samsung is in talks with BlackBerry around a $7.5 billion buyout. I think that's a smart trade on Samsung's part if it comes off. BlackBerry is in such transition today, so any investment has been a bet on the future. So at this point, Samsung is cutting in before that full future becomes a reality. Interesting point. How many Samsung phones do you see in offices? This would be Samsung's chance to get into the enterprise. I think that's what that's all about. Euro dollar 176.70. And a pretty incredible session yesterday. I think it traded as low as 117.25. And then it just rallied all the way up, close to 118.50, I think. Dollar index 92.23, very bullish about that. Maybe this recent softness, the retail sales, a little bit of backing and filling is a chance to get in again. Japanese yen 117.75, Swissy 102.06. Pound 152.30 when I came in. I think it's softer. Aussie 0.8208. India rupee where they cut rates 61.785. South Korean won 1082.90. Rial 261.60. Egyptian pound 715.05. Official rate, of course. South African rand 1145.88. That goes to 12. Dollar index, I'll put up a 3-month chart. My target's 100, as it's been for a while. Euro dollar, I'll put up a 3-month chart. My target is 1. Parity. Gold 1230.74. Yesterday jumped to its highest since October the 23rd, touching 1244 before pairing gains to close unchanged. It was sold off along with copper. Copper got trashed in the last few sessions, which is now at a 5.5-year low. Gold, this is a comment coming out of Jason Solar, metals dealer at MKS Group, and I think he's right. Gold has now tested 1245 3 times and failed on each occasion. We believe gold could test 1215, 1220 in the coming days, especially with a good rebound going in the dollar. Crude oil, and I'm going to put up a 5-day chart. Have a look at this. We're now, this is the March contract at $48.29. If you look at the 5-day chart, you can see a humongous rally yesterday up to 50. Someone must have squeezed the shorts big time. I'll also put up a 6-month chart. You can see the trend is your friend. It's still going lower in my view. And an interesting chart of the day on Bloomberg. Oil collapse of 1986 shows rebound could be years away. And it shows what happened in 86 and how long it took for oil to come back. And that was my point over the weekend where I said I see an average of $50 a barrel for 24 months. Venezuela's Maduro has been going cap in hand. He was not too long ago in China. He's now apparently secured financing from Qatari banks, which was interesting. We're raising financing for several $billion, not only for 2015 but also for 2016. And then I saw a tweet from Jacqueline PSUV. It's in Spanish, but it was a photograph of Nicolas Maduro looking over the precipice or looking down somewhere, and I think it's going to be a big challenge digging himself out of this one. Rajan lowered the benchmark repurchase rate by a quarter point to 7.75%. That was a smart move, I think, on his part. Of course, India is benefiting from a much lower oil price. The inflation rate the back has been broken, and I think Rajan is signalling he's with the Narendra Modi program. The Mail and Guardian has a very interesting article. Half of Africa's GDP is at stake in 10 elections this year, and then some very interesting facts that tell us that Africa's GDP could be much bigger. But saying, first we've got all these elections. Zambia kicks off next week. 10 more countries expected to have voted this year when the dust settles. Nigeria, Ethiopia, Sudan, Cote d'Ivoire, Tanzania, Togo, South Sudan, CAR, Burkina Faso will also attempt to vote. And then going back to this data, intra-African trade has in absolute terms increased fourfold over the last decade to $130 billion. That's good. Despite, in relative terms, remaining at 12%. That's interesting. Talking about cross-border banking and financial services are the dominant sector in intra-African FDI. Stock markets were only 5 in 1990. They're 29 now. Close to 25% of Africa's 54 countries are landlocked. Talking about African migration, on average, Africa experiences more migration per year than many other parts of the world. Very interesting, that. Talking about remittances amounting to $40 billion or 2.6% of regional GDP. In several fragile states, remittances may exceed 50% of their GDP. South African firms in 2010 accounted for about a fourth of all intra-African exports, but only 10% of imports. A major imbalance. How interesting. Regional integration in Africa is not too recent a process. Lagos Plan of Action, adopted in 1980. Talking about the different economic blocks, but a very interesting perspective, regional infrastructure as well. For every $1 billion invested in infrastructure, between 26,000 and 110,000 direct and indirect jobs can be created. And this is highest in the road sector, lowest in the capital-intensive power sector. South African all-share had a bad session on yesterday, down 2.78%. It's negative 3.4% year to date. Dollar Rand this morning was at 11.4580. I'm a bear. Egyptian pound official rate unchanged at 7.15. The equity markets love CC, just overlaid the moment he came into power to the performance this year. I think it's again the best performing stock market in Africa, up 6.96% year to date, bounced 2.53% yesterday. On the 10th of November, I said turning to the markets in Africa, the Nigerian Naira and the all-share index have been wagadoogooed by the collapse in the price of oil. The Nigerian stock market is down an eye-popping 17.07% year to date, slumped 3.84% yesterday, lowest since Jan 10, 2013. It's lost more this year than it lost the entire last year. I still think the currency heads to 200, as I said on the 19th of November, but the central bank have dried out liquidity as a way of trying to stall that run up to 200. Satellite image showing the extent of damage in Doron Baga taken on the 7th of January following an attack by Boko Haram has been posted by Amnesty via Digital Globe. Satellite images released shocking evidence of the scale of last week's attack on the towns of Baga and Doron Baga by Boko Haram militants. I'll put up that satellite image. They've got a before and after. If you click on the link, 3,700 structures damaged or completely destroyed. Of all Boko Haram assaults analysed by Amnesty International, this is the largest and most destructive yet. It represents a deliberate attack on civilians whose homes, clinics and schools are now burnt or ruined. And on the 12th of January, I said, in fact, President Goodluck Jonathan saw fit to send condolences to France, but failed to mention events at home entirely. And I think, the military came out and said no more than 150 dead, and I was saying to the folks who work in my office, isn't it appalling when your president does not want to recognise the numbers? And I said, had it been an Israeli, that body would have been picked up and taken back to Israel and given a proper burial. Kudos to them for doing that. Insurgency, tail risk. This is the Boko Haram I was talking about it. The insurgency tail risk remains. How it plays out will have important consequence for ourselves and the entire Africa Rising narrative. And I was writing last year, and I said, what is clear is that the Boko Haram insurgency has intensified and ratcheted higher, and it's ratcheted higher again. Abu Bakr Shekau popped up and he said, we are very happy with what happened at the heart of France. Well, that's not going to be well received. O you French people, O you who follow the religion of democracy, between you and us is enmity and eternity. Boko Haram continues to focus on consolidating its territorial gains in the extreme northeast, whilst also hitting northern cities further afield with one-off bombings. In these regions, militants appear undeterred by counterinsurgency operations, attacking both remote security and civilian targets with near impunity. And you will remember the piece I wrote on the 28th of April when I referred to Abu Bakr Shekau taunting President Goodluck Jonathan with the comment, I am in your cities, and I asked, or is it cities? Ghana Stock Exchange down 1.39% yesterday. It's down 1.44% year to date. Ghana's economy probably grew 4.2% in 2014. That's a stat on Stats Office. Obviously, it was a turbulent year. Al-Noor MB on Twitter says Rwanda is the safest country to live in Africa, according to a Gallup poll. Uganda's shilling is the worst performing currency in Africa against the dollar this year, weakened for an 8th day yesterday to a more than 3-year low. Interesting piece in Al Jazeera English called Roadblocks to Destination Zimbabwe, and some lovely photographs. What their thesis is that police roadblocks in Zimbabwe with officers demanding bribes are scaring off tourists. I'll put up an image of that, but I like the image they've got of the Victoria Falls, the largest waterfall in the world, attracts hundreds and thousands of tourists every year. Gabon, Op Gabon is tweeting that Jean Ping's house was attacked. Jean Ping, by Ali Bongo's people. Jean Ping has written an article. It's in French, but it's linked on Rich Wrap-Ups if you want to have a look. An irony of ironies, Ali Bongo was, of course, at the march, Je suis Charlie Hebdo, and a lot of people were unhappy with that. Kenya holds key lending rate as inflation seen slowing further. Leaving the rate unchanged will ensure that inflation continues to decline towards the 5% target. Energy Regulatory Commission yesterday lowered the cost of fuel to the lowest in 4 years. And I said I'm expecting a slump in the inflation rate, which I am, and through the lower inflation band. And in fact, my bias is that the MPC could be easing marginally at some point this year. Relief for motorists as fuel prices drop to 4-year low. I'd written about this. I'd expected a drop below 100 before Christmas. We didn't get that. We got 102. We're now near 90. And I think this will prove a powerful catalyst for improved consumer sentiment, improved spending, much needed adrenaline shot in the arm. of the economy. Data from the Kenya Motor Industry Association shows that new vehicle dealers sold 14,499 units in 2014, marking a new high since the liberalization of the local motor trade in the 1990s. The number of units, this is interesting, sold last year is 20.3% more than the previous peak. I'll put up a photograph of boys and their toys that I took in Johannesburg, admittedly, but in a Jaguar. And subsequently bought one, which is rather nice. Kenya shilling 91.271, been on a losing streak, but then so is everything else. Nairobi all share up another 0.8%, it's up 1.96% year to date. Powerful 2.486% two-day rally we've seen. Safaricom plus 5.69% this year, within just 1% of a record. Centum up 13.11% this year. KCB surged 2.61% yesterday, within 1.66% of an all-time high. Mumia Sugar from zero to hero, up 42.1% year to date. NSE 20 is up 1.59% year to date and at a 2.5-month high. Tullow Oil have written off $2.3 billion as the oil price fall takes toll, and I've been talking about that previously. I think, the price cut seen yesterday is an important move. It will surely constitute a much needed adrenaline shot in the economy's arm. Powerful two-day rally we've seen. Let's see how it behaves today. And I think, in part it might be because local sellers became defensive around the capital gains tax issue, reduced the supply side to the market. International funds, getting money in frontier funds, had to put that to work, lifted prices, and you didn't have that much supply, and it's been very interestingly bullish. Started off on low volume, but then picked up. Safaricom, as I said, just 1% off an all-time high. Kenya Airways lagged a global worldwide airline stock rally, but bounced 3.33% yesterday. Some of that on news they were going to book gains on some real estate in Embakasi. Scan Group up 6.86%, Jimmy up 1.9%. KCB, as I said, within 1.66% of an all-time high. Centum has been a very strong performer this year, a little bit oversold at the end of last year. Chris Kerouac did some big bed and breakfast trades which suppressed the price, so we're rebounding from that. The Mumia Sugar up another 8% yesterday, up 42.105% year to date. EABL at 305, but I think it's going to 400 this year. And Total's been strong as well, up 9.375% year to date. Once again, hope the week's going well. Thank you for stopping by.